It seems that January 2025 has proven to be quite eventful when it comes to the subject of gruesome deaths, with countless people having committed or having been sentenced for the despicable act of murder. And so I've gone through and chose 5 of the most brutal, shocking and downright despicable cases that include 7 of the most disgustingly callous murderers to showcase to you in this video. Being careful to choose cases that were not always reported nationally, and so knowing that you will most probably not have heard of some, if not most, of these cases. From a 15-year-old child who masterminded the brutal murder of a 40-year-old man simply to steal his dog, to a man who killed his partner and tried to hack off her head with a meat cleaver. These cases truly were the most shocking I came across, and they were all committed by murderers who were either sentenced or found guilty of the act in January 2025. Hello and welcome to the Diary of Madmen and Monsters, where we talk about the mad men, women and monsters that inhabit our society, covering well-known and not so well-known cases across the UK and beyond. And if your ideal life mantra is eat, sleep, true crime, repeat, then you're in the right place and you're going to fit in well. Now, let's get ready because it's time for more true crime. The first of our 3 miserable murderers on the list is Croatia Stroud, Jordan Tams and Leandro Lopez, who on the 30th of January 2025 were jailed for life for the murder of Gary Belfield, a 40-year-old resident of Elliott Drive, Felling in Gateshead, and for the attempted murder of his son Luke Williams, 21. On the unsuspecting evening of the 27th of April 2024, after a day of smoking weed, the trio, who were just 15, 17 and 17 at the time, had turned up at Gary's flat after Croatia had decided she would be the champion who would reunite her half-sister with a dog that Gary had kept possession of after splitting with a said family member. She had also insinuated that Gary had been an abusive partner to her family member and that she had suspicions he was a However, these rumours were later found to be completely baseless. Under Croatia's guidance, the 3 hatched a plot to turn up at Gary's flat, gain entry however they could, to take back the dog and exact revenge for Gary's apparent mistreatment of said family member. So, just after 9 PM on the 27th of April, Jordan and Leandro, both wearing dark clothing and balaclavas, alongside Croatia, made their way to Gary's flat, where Jordan Tams and Leandro Lopez entered the property with tools at the ready, determined to dish out the punishment they had previously discussed. Croatia, it was found, had decided to wait outside at this point. One can only assume this was due to her not wanting to witness the coming onslaught of violence she knew was about to be inflicted upon Gary and his son. As the pair entered the property, with Tams carrying a knife and Lopez a screwdriver, they were met by Luke Williams, Gary's son, who was just about to leave the sitting room. He said the twosome had entered the home, and as he was met with menacing glares from the two, they said nothing and simply jumped into action, attacking him and then his father without a word of warning or even a reason why. Jordan, who was leading the way as they entered the home, immediately upon seeing Williams, punched Williams in the face and then proceeded to stab him in the upper arm and left upper side. To try and protect himself, Mr. Williams then turned away, and seeing his opportunity to do so, Tams then stabbed him in the back multiple times. Williams said that as the attack was happening, he made multiple attempts to grab the knife from Tams' hand, but simply couldn't do so, resulting in more injuries to his hands and body as a result of his efforts. As Tams was attacking Mr. Williams, Lopez had then begun a brutal assault on Gary Belfield, who had barely had time to get off the couch. He was lunged upon and stabbed again and again relentlessly by Lopez. As Williams was locked in a desperate battle for his life, he managed to struggle free from his attackers and was able to escape, mustering the energy to run out of the home and towards a nearby garage. As he left the home of his father, desperately looking to find help and alert emergency services, he noticed Croatia, who he knew and thought that he was on all right terms with, stood waiting outside. And as he ran past, he said, "What the F are you playing at?" To which Croatia, who had apparently looked shocked to see him, made no reply. As he ran, with the thought of what the evil pair were now doing to his dad, Williams could feel his injuries taking effect. But, wanting to do all that he could to get help for his father and himself, he carried on, eventually arriving at the garage, staggering in and shouting, help me, they're going to get me," where a worker noticed him covered in blood, shaking and unsteady on his feet. Immediately, police and ambulances were called and they were promptly dispatched. Back at the home of Gary Belfield, after his son had managed to escape, both attackers had turned their attentions towards Gary, upping the ante and placing the odds very much in their favour, creating a scenario that simply meant Gary truly didn't have a chance of being able to fend them off. Upon inflicting 11 different stab wounds across his body and feeling like they had accomplished their intended plan, the pair made their way outside of Mr. Belfield's home and, upon meeting Croatia outside, the threesome made their getaway, with CCTV capturing them making their escape across town, with Croatia leading the way and the other two following, with balaclavas still adorned. Just minutes after the three left, police arrived at the property and upon entering found Mr. Belfield lying on his couch, covered in blood, pale, unresponsive and not breathing. The police did what they could to administer first aid and then the emergency personnel arrived by ambulance and took over treatment. Unfortunately, despite the best efforts of all concerned, he was declared dead at the scene. It was later found in a post-mortem that Gary had been stabbed 11 times in total to the head, neck, upper and lower back, arms and legs, with the fatal blow coming from a screwdriver piercing the main artery in his upper thigh. It was found that he had even sustained a stab wound to the sole of his foot, where the knife had pierced his shoe and impaled him as he was lying on his back, desperately trying to kick his attackers away with his feet. Upon launching an investigation, police located and arrested Croatia, Jordan and Leandro, and they were then charged with murder and attempted murder. And on the 30th of January, the three were detained at His Majesty's pleasure, which is essentially life imprisonment for those under 18 years of age, with Leandro and Jordan given a minimum term of 26 years and Croatia given a minimum term of 20 years. Mr. Justice Constable, who lifted reporting restrictions so the two younger killers could be identified, said the dreadful attack was shocking because of both its brutality and the fact it was encouraged and carried out by children. He said the ferocity of it spoke for itself, and Mr. Williams was lucky to survive, while Stroud was waiting outside to see her plan put into action. Our fourth killer on the list is Kyle Dumble, who on the evening of November the 18th, 2023, murdered 24-year-old Jack Field in one of the most gruesome and despicable ways imaginable. On the night of Saturday 18th of November 2023 at approximately 11 p.m, Jack Field, a 24-year-old retail supervisor from Elysium, had been walking home in high spirits after a night out drinking with a group of friends when he happened to walk past a black Mitsubishi 4x4 parked up in the street. Inside the car was Jimmy Stonestreet, who, after staring Jack down, shouted out of the window, "What you looking at?" and "Come on then, big man," before jumping out of his car, approaching Jack and starting a fight with him. As the scuffle ensued, Kyle Dumble, a friend of Jimmy's who was in a Mini that had been parked up next to Jimmy Stonestreet's Mitsubishi 4x4, then jumped into the 4x4 and, turning the car into a lethal weapon, decided to drive towards the group that Jimmy had started the fight with. Kyle drove towards the group at speed, appearing to knock into someone and then reversing and stopping. Upon doing so, the fighting stopped and Jimmy Stonestreet disengaged, climbing into the passenger side of the Mitsubishi. At this point, the pair, safely enclosed in the vehicle, could have taken this opportunity to drive away and end things there. But instead of doing so, Kyle decided to take things to another level of violence, choosing to continue using the car as a weapon and once again driving towards the group. Once Jimmy was inside of the car, Kyle reversed at speed for some distance, driving past a white transit van and then deliberately turning the car towards the young men hiding in the gap between the van and a red Vauxhall Astra. In doing so, he rammed straight into the Astra with such force that it spun the car around and pushed it up onto the grassy area just beyond the pavement, with the 4x4 Kyle was driving following the Astra onto the pavement as well. As the Vauxhall span, it hit both Jack Field and his friend Jake Barry, injuring Jake and knocking Jack Field to the ground with his head landing right beside the tyre of the Mitsubishi Shogun. As Jack lay next to the 4x4, dazed and confused by the impact that had just knocked him off his feet, Kyle Dumble looked out of the open window of the Mitsubishi, saw that Jack was lying next to the car he was driving, and callously decided to drive forward over Jack's head, crushing his skull and killing him instantly. Immediately upon running over Jack, Kyle and Jimmy fled the scene. Police and ambulance services then arrived just minutes later and found Jack critically injured and sadly pronounced him dead at the scene. The next day, Kyle Dumble and Jimmy Stonestreet handed themselves into the police, with Kyle telling police that he hadn't even realised he had hit someone until he had seen it on the news that day. He also tried to defend his actions by blaming it on the dodgy gearbox in the car, claiming the car would often look like it was in neutral when it was actually in drive. Thankfully, the jury saw through his claims and he was found guilty of murder, with the judge sentencing him to life in prison with a minimum sentence of 17 years on the 24th of January 2024. In a statement read to the court, Mr. Field's mother, Jane, mourned the loss of her son, who she described as her best friend and protector. She said, "As a parent, all you want to do is protect your children, and I couldn't protect you this time. I will forever be grateful that you are my son." Now, just before I move on to the next on the list, if you haven't already done so and want to see more videos like this, please press the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel to help us jump on the algorithm and grow the channel. Thank you, and on we go with the video. Our fifth brutal bastard on the list is Stephen Francis, a 58-year-old convicted rapist and all-round despicable excuse for a human being who, in October 2023, took the life of Louisa Hall, a 43-year-old woman he had taken back to his flat and then subject to a brutal bevy of abuse. On October the 25th, 2023, an ambulance was called to the home of Stephen Francis after he claimed that he had returned home from visiting a friend and found Miss Hall on his living room floor. Upon their arrival, they found Miss Hall naked and unconscious, with blood seeping from her mouth and nose and bruising covering most of her body. Paramedics worked hard to try and save Miss Hall, but unfortunately, as hard as they tried, Louise would be pronounced dead at the scene. During their efforts to save Miss Hall, and after uncovering the extent of her injuries, ambulance staff became incredibly suspicious, and so they alerted the police. Upon their arrival, police arrested Francis on suspicion of murder, and upon launching their investigation into the death of Miss Hall, uncovered a frightening picture of a man who had called the ambulance that day. Whilst in custody, Stephen had explained that he had first met Louise Hall that day in Leeds city centre, and that after their chance encounter, she had simply followed him home. He then claimed that he had gone out and travelled by bus to visit a friend before returning to his home around an hour later as his friend was not in, and finding Louise unconscious in his flat. Extensive enquiries were then carried out to corroborate Francis's account, and it was found that his story was indeed just that, a fictional story he had concocted in a rush after calling the emergency services. It was quickly found, in fact, that CCTV had shown Francis with Miss Hall, who was a sex worker, and another woman in Top Moorside, Holbeck, in the early hours of October the 25th, hours before he had claimed to have bumped into her in the city centre. Further footage showed them arriving at Oatlands Court, Francis's residence, at 6 a.m. As well as this, the friend who Stephen had claimed he had gone to visit told officers that he hadn't seen Francis for about 13 years, and it turned out that the bus ticket he claimed to have used to get the bus to go and see his friend hadn't been used on any bus at all that day. CCTV near Stephen's address also only showed Francis leaving his flat on October 25th at 9:58 a.m. before returning again at 10:17 a.m. with no other comings or goings at all happening from him or his flat until paramedics arrived. It was also found that Francis's DNA was recovered from Miss Hall's neck. Throughout their investigation into Francis, police also uncovered a history of brutality, with it being found that Francis had previously appeared in court for attacking 2 police officers, as well as having been found guilty of possessing an offensive weapon, supplying cocaine, and for the of another woman 35 years earlier. They also found that Francis had a second RAPE allegation made towards him in 2016 by a sex worker that couldn't be progressed at the time due to evidential difficulties. The victim, who was just 22 years old at the time of the incident, had reported that she was taken back to Francis's flat in Oatland Court in February that year and had then been stripped naked, assaulted, robbed, rendered unconscious, and then RAPED multiple times. Upon being contacted by the team investigating the murder of Miss Hall, she agreed to police reopening her case against Stephen Francis, and the team then ran the investigation alongside the investigation into the murder of Louisa Hall. After a post-mortem investigation, it was found that Louisa Hall had sustained a total of 117 fresh blunt force trauma injuries to her head, chest, abdomen, legs and arms, 45 of which were found to have come from an unknown weapon. They also found that an injury to her neck was compatible with forceful strangulation by hands or by a ligature. The pathologist conducting the post-mortem investigation remarked that the head injuries alone were so serious that those alone could have proven fatal. Francis denied any involvement in the death of Louisa and in the 2016 attack, but thanks to the detailed and comprehensive work carried out by police officers working on the case, they were able to completely disprove Stephen's fictitious account of events, and he was found guilty of the murder of Miss Hall and for the offences in 2016 by unanimous verdict at Leeds Crown Court on the 22nd of January 2025, and on the 23rd of January he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 28 years. Louisa's family described her as a kind and beautiful person and a wonderful mum, and after thanking the West Yorkshire Police and court staff for their hard work, they said, "We hope nobody has to go through the pain and heartache that Stephen Francis has put us through." Our sixth murdering madman today is John Baldwin, a 42-year-old monster who had lived with his partner Eve McIntyre, a 57-year-old much-loved mother and grandmother, in Gateshead, England, for approximately 4 years before her untimely death at his hands. On the 21st of August 2024, police received a call from a passenger of a bus that had been commandeered by a man wearing a kimono, boxer shorts and slippers. Upon entering the bus, he began walking up and down the bus asking passengers for £2 before waving a meat cleaver at the bus driver, telling the driver to not stop at any bus stops on his route and to take him straight to Berkeley. The bus driver, who ignored Baldwin's requests to carry on driving, stopped the bus and opened the doors, prompting him to run off the bus. As he ran, the driver decided to follow him, making sure to maintain a safe distance so as he could direct the police to where John would go when they arrived. Upon their arrival, police gave chase and Baldwin ran into the grounds of a care home where he put up a fight to resist arrest, causing officers to have to discharge their taser twice to no effect. John then disappeared and hid his meat cleaver under some vegetation in a neighbouring garden. He then ran into the street where he was restrained after putting up a violent struggle that caused arresting officers to use PAVA spray, a baton and to discharge a taser for the third time. As he was being arrested, John gave police his address and gave multiple rambling speeches about how upstairs neighbours had come in and attacked himself and his girlfriend, who he repeatedly described as that effing cunt. Officers then attended to his home, where they walked into what was described as a scene of indescribable horror. When the police entered the home, they found Eve McIntyre, John's partner, lying face down on settee cushions, with her hands tied behind her back and her trousers pulled down, revealing her underwear. There was a massive amount of blood covering the floor, and it was obvious that she had died from a devastating array of injuries. A post-mortem later revealed that she had sustained 37 separate sharp force injuries to the head, neck and torso, as well as damage to the right carotid artery and jugular vein. There was also a stab wound to the right lung, facial bruises, bruises to the upper limbs, a fracture to her right hand and a fracture to her right thumb. It was said that 20 of the sharp force injuries were to her head and neck alone, and the 2 of the neck injuries were so deep they damaged the vertebrae, suggesting that John had attempted to remove Eve's head. Police said that the cuts to the neck and an injury that caused a partial skull fracture signified the use of a meat cleaver by Baldwin. As police went on to investigate the murder of Eve, a picture of John Baldwin began to emerge that was not complimentary in any way. It was found that violence seemed to be Baldwin's modus operandi, with reports from neighbours, friends and family that he was a controlling, abusive and violent partner to Eve. He had, on multiple occasions, been witnessed by neighbours punching, kicking and attacking her with knives and a hammer. But when challenged by said neighbours, he told them, "I don't hit her that hard." It was also found that he had 12 previous convictions for an array of offences, from violence, weapons and causing suffering to an animal. Upon being questioned, John told the police various stories and has never fully given a reason as to what happened or why. At one point, he claimed Eve had walked away from the attack. At another, he said it was self-defense. And at another, he maintained that other people, including the upstairs neighbours, entered the flat and attacked them both. What it was plain to see, and what he himself had admitted, was that he had taken heroin that very day. And so we can only imagine that this had, in some way or another, influenced his actions on that fateful day. What we do know is that Eve McIntyre was last seen alive between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. on the 21st of August 2024, when her neighbour had spoken to her at her door. It is then believed that John had murdered Eve in cold blood using the meat cleaver and a second knife, and had then left their home in his kimono, boxer shorts and slippers, and made his way along Sunderland Road, where an off-duty police officer seen him as he drove home after his shift. Another police vehicle then passed him and Baldwin tried to hide. He then tried to stop 2 cars, taking hold of a driver's door handle on one of them. It is then at about 11:20 that he boarded the bus. After pleading not guilty to murder but guilty to manslaughter up until a day before his trial, just the day before his trial was due to begin, John pleaded guilty to murder and was jailed for life with a minimum term of 18 years and 162 days on the 30th of January 2025. Eve's daughter, Ashton, paid tribute to her mother, telling the court her mother loved to read, cook and spend time with her grandchildren, with her favourite phrase being, "Onwards and upwards, watch this space." She said, "I was and am heartbroken," adding, "This was my mum and I loved her deeply." Our last murdering monster on the list is Ben Hughes, who on what was the pair's second date murdered Laura Robson, a 37-year-old mum of one from Gateshead, in a brutal and heartless attack. On the evening of July 22nd, 2024, at approximately 9 p.m, Mr. Lamb, a concerned neighbour, heard raised voices coming from the flat below his. Then, suddenly, he heard a banging. A little while later, at what he described as around 10 p.m, he then heard the sound of heavy breathing, which he described as someone being choked. The concerned neighbour then went downstairs and knocked on his neighbour's door, just looking to check and make sure things were okay, but he received no answer. Once returning to his own flat above, he suddenly heard loud screams, groans and cries of fear, and a woman's voice asking for help. He described the noises that he was hearing as unlike anything he had heard before, and so he decided to take out his phone and record said noises. On the recording, the woman is heard shouting, "Somebody help, I'm going to die, I'm going to bleed to death," followed by a man replying, "You are going to die anyway, you're going to bleed out, no one is coming to help you, no one knows you are here." Suddenly, as quick as the noises started, they stopped, and the neighbour then decided to call the police. On the 21st of July 2024, Laura Robson had excitedly told her friend Megan she was going on her first date with Ben Hughes, a man that had approached Megan earlier that day, expressing interest in Laura and asking Megan to pass on his number to her. Laura then, on the evening of the 21st of June, arranged to meet up with Ben for the first time and decided to spend the evening with him at his flat. The next day, on the 22nd, Laura then visited her friend Megan's house and reported that they had got on really well and had kissed. Megan said that while she was there, Ben had called Laura 5 or 6 times, which she found a little bit strange. Later that night, Megan asked Laura to spend the night at her house, but Laura said that she had already arranged to spend the night with Hughes at his flat again. On the evening of the 22nd of July, Laura had driven to Ben's flat and they had then decided to go for a walk together around the local area, and then afterwards returned to Ben's flat. Megan said that Laura had been texting her and that things had started off well, but that at 10:03 p.m, Laura texted her saying, "I love you so much, I'm coming down now though, it's not that good," indicating that things had taken a turn for the worse. Unbeknown to Megan, this text would be the last text Laura would send before her brutal death at the hands of Hughes, because just moments later would be when the neighbour upstairs would hear the sounds of what turned out to be Hughes attacking and choking Laura. Upon the police's arrival, Hughes was shocked to see them, but police said that he remained calm even though he was sweating profusely. It was also noted that by the time the police had arrived at the flat, which was approximately 26 minutes after being called, Hughes had been washed and had a full change of clothes. As the police entered the property, Hughes simply said, "Yous have caught me." Once in Hughes' flat, police found Laura's body on the living room floor, with a massive amount of blood pooled around her, and unfortunately it was found by paramedics that nothing could be done to save her. Hughes had stabbed and slashed at her with a kitchen knife at least 27 times, with 13 stab wounds to the side of her neck, 16 slash wounds to the same area, and 1 defensive injury to her hand. It was found that one of the knife wounds had cut her jugular vein, and it was this that had led to her death. Upon launching an investigation into the murder, police found that the attack had started in the hallway just outside of the living room. It had then lasted almost half an hour, and after the attack had finished, Hughes had dragged Laura along the floor to enable him to close the living room door. Judge Sloan, who presided over the trial, said it was a sustained and particularly brutal attack involving gratuitous violence, adding, "It will have been a terrifying ordeal for Miss Robson and will have resulted in her experiencing extreme physical pain and mental suffering before she succumbed." Upon his arrest, Ben Hughes pled guilty to the murder of Laura immediately, and on the 10th of January 2025, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 17.5 years. But he has never given a reason why he decided to murder Laura on the night of the 22nd of July, deciding instead to keep the answers that so many of Laura's friends and family want from them. At this point, I just want to express my deepest sympathies and condolences to the victims, friends and family of all of the victims we have spoken about in today's video. On that note, if you have gotten this far in the video and want to watch more videos from our channel, why not try the video on screen now, where I discuss 3 of the darkest YouTube murders committed by or to YouTubers who were building a following before the murders took place. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one when it'll once again be time for more true crime.